We've got a lot of things to cover today. Again, for those of you just joining us, my name is Gaylord Lopez. I'm the director of the Georgia Poison Center. I've been here for a couple minutes. Started back in 1988 as director, and 31 years later, I'm still sitting in this seat wearing the same suit I wore when I first started this particular job. So I'm excited to go ahead and present our lecture today. I've got a couple goals in mind, most notably to educate you about our services, about what we do here at the Poison Center, and then hopefully I'll entertain as well. So we'll be talking for about 40 or 50 minutes, and then leave a little bit of time for question and answer at the end. So let's go ahead and get started with basic learning objectives for our lecture today. So we're going to talk about sort of what we do here at the Poison Center, because I'm sure there are some of you out there who have no clue. Some of you may have a limited knowledge base of what we do, and hopefully I'll expand that as we move through this presentation. I'll kind of share with you two or three really interesting cases that sort of represent the kind of things we do on a daily basis. So hopefully I'll be able to educate and entertain there. And then I'll talk about how we interact with our various entities, and also talk about the ways that you can, if you've never connected with us, how you can connect with us. Okay, so if you were unaware, these are the sort of the broad stroke, the bigger picture of the kind of things that we do. So our bread and butter service that we deliver is answering questions about human poisonings for our service area, and that is the state of Georgia. So that's our bread and butter. We're going to talk a little bit about who calls us and how old they are and what they call us about, but human poisons make up the majority of what we do. You'd be surprised to learn, and raise your hands at home if you are an animal owner. That includes me, but you may not know this, but we're the Animal Poison Center for the state of Georgia. I've got 3 great family members at home: Pearl, my French bulldog; Daisy, my older English bulldog; and then we took on a second English bulldog in Bella. And people, love that service here. And at our height, we were receiving upwards of 1,000 calls a month as it relates to animal poison. And it shouldn't surprise you that many of the compliments that we get are not about saving children's lives. It's saving dogs and cats' lives. So as family members, we all know that these people or these animals are very close to us, and we consider them family members. But yeah, it's an interesting stat. And if we have time to talk about animal poisons in depth a little later, I'll dive into it. The other thing that we do is we answer calls answer the questions that you typically ask a pharmacist when you're in a pharmacy. So we're a drug information center. So we'll answer questions about drug interactions. We'll answer questions about drug safety. Just about any question you ask a pharmacist, you can ask us through our same information hotline. Another service that you're probably unaware of, but it's a very busy service, and that is our animal bite service. What is that? Well, it's all about the word rabies. And in just a bit, we'll review rabies, but people don't realize that if you get bitten by an animal, you can call the Georgia Poison Center. So that's a unique service that not all poison centers offer, but we do that here in Georgia. We partner with our state folks at Department of Public Health. They're the ones who primarily fund us, and so we'll talk about some of the activities we've been involved with there. Other things that we do, like we're doing now, public education programs, whether it's health fairs, lectures. The next piece there, the ITP, our instructor training program. If you're really interested in helping us promote awareness and education, take our online instructor training class, and we have more information later to share about that. But we have various other partners like Safe Kids that we do a number of programs with. And then in addition to some of the lay public presentations, we also do a number of professional talks. So we'll go into hospitals, we'll go into nursing units across the state, and we'll give sort of continuing education lectures, and I'll share a couple of the type of lectures that we do for these guys. Now, if you're interested about poisoning, let's go over some basic epidemiology. So nationally, I think last year, there were over 2 million human exposures reported to poison centers nationwide. We are one of 55 poison centers scattered throughout the United States. We're the only one in Georgia, so we service the 10.5 million, the 155 square kilometers of land here. Georgia, as you know, has the 24th largest land mass in the United States, so we've got a fairly decent area to cover. From Young Harris to Valdosta, we're it. Now, we also happen to get calls from around the world, mainly because people think we're affiliated with the CDC, and in fact, we're not the CDC. But through our website, because we offer chat and email services, we'll get calls from literally around the world. Now, here in Georgia, we were up to a high of nearly 95,000 human exposures reported to us, but over the last 5 to 7 years, that volume has decreased dramatically, not only at our poison center, but poison centers across the United States. In fact, nationally, about 10 years ago, poison centers reported over 4.5 million exposures. We had 94,000 of those. Now we're about 70,000. Why is that, you might ask? Well, I have 2 words for that reason, and you might know those words, but in case you don't, I'm going to tell you what they are. Dr. Google. That's right. People are searching the web, something that we really don't want them to do, because would you want to trust an algorithm, especially an algorithm that may be out of date? I say no. I say talk to a human, talk to one of our specialists, but people want those quick answers, so whether it's their tablet or their mobile device, they're looking for answers, not usually up to date. We would prefer them to call us. Now, poisoning shot up the charts. It's the leading cause of accidental death in children. And so that's a scary statistic, and obviously it's a major public health issue. Now, when people call into the center, they're not getting AT&T operator number 12 or 13. You're getting healthcare professionals, people that have taken on extra training, and they're basically poison information specialists. Now, many years ago, just a quick backdrop story, many years ago, they were known as poison specialists or poison information specialists, but the acronym wasn't really sexy. If you think about what their new title is, it's just a little play on that. They're known as specialists in poison information, or spies. Way more attractive as opposed to pisses, right? Now imagine, you talk to someone about where you work and what you do, and you say you're a piss. Doesn't go over too well, right? But now you say, well, I'm a spy at the Georgia Poison Center, sort of, James Bondish, if you will. But look who the spies are. Again, these are people like you and me who are healthcare professionals, many of them being pharmacists. The primary group that we have working for us who man the phones are nurses, and then we have other physicians who also take calls for the poison center. So you're talking to a healthcare professional around the clock and for no charge. Now, when was the last time the lay public was able to call their doctor and get advice for free? Doesn't happen. But here at the Georgia Poison Center, your calls come into us, and they are free. Now, we don't really advertise, where we are, I'd like to tell people that I'd love for my office to be on the Lido deck on a Carnival cruise line, but because I told you we're not at the CDC, the real place that we're kind of hiding is at Grady. I happen to be, well, the last time I checked, I happen to be a Grady Health System employee, and we have our offices right there on the Grady campus. Not really information that we like to share publicly, but in case you were wondering, we're right here at Grady. Now, when you think about our activities, a lot of them are dictated by our relationship with state public health. And because they fund many of our efforts here, we partner with them on a number of different things. For example, when health departments close around the state at during the 5 o'clock hour on a daily basis and on weekends and holidays, we take all their calls after hours that go to various health departments. We also take calls where laboratories are reporting diseases that may have been captured through lab monitoring. We run a ChemPack program where we know where strategically placed antidotes are for a chemical outbreak, for example, and we deal with that program. I mentioned earlier we handle animal bites, and so I'll talk about rabies in just a second. And then we do a number of professional trainings across the state. So there are a number of projects that we do, and as you see, they also include things like food poisoning surveillance. We've worked with the state in providing relief for disaster victims. For example, when the Katrina hurricane hit a number of years ago in Louisiana, the Georgia Poison Center's infrastructure was used so that people who were relocating to our state were able to find everything from medicines to housing to food by calling a certain number, and they were actually calling the Poison Center. So we've done H1N1 phone answering for the state, Ebola. We are now looking at, or we've been doing verification of THC cards and others. So we're very much integrated into a lot of state programs. Probably didn't know that, but when the hand that feeds you says, can you help me? We say yes first, and we worry about, the money issues later. But I talked about rabies, and here's the thing about rabies, right? If you get bitten by a rabid animal and you start coming down with symptoms, there's only about 100% chance you're going to die. Okay, not really great odds, right? We at the Poison Center manage those cases because we're in a position to be able to recommend antidote or not. But here's the problem, right? Just because there's an antidote doesn't mean you get it. And so there has to be a lot of critical thinking going on, following the policies and procedures. In fact, when you look at the call volume, we're probably up to nearly 1,900 or close to 2,000 animal bites per year. Only about a third of them require the antidote or the rabies shots, right? And so when you think about that number, and even though I joked about it, there's only 100% chance you're going to die, because of the very tightly controlled protocols and because we're using science instead of safe rather than sorry methods, only about a third of us require treatment. So call us and we'll be able to make sure we put you in the right category. Because for us, it's a matter of making sure we understand what type of animal has bitten you. There are some animals that are very, very low risk, like rabbits and chipmunks and squirrels. And then there are very, very high risk animals like bats. So we will determine who needs the biologicals and who doesn't. And that is a life-saving program that we have here. Now, I had mentioned that we also do a variety of professional trainings. So think of, the kind of, if you think about the kind of programs we do deliver, they include things like advanced hazmat and life support, blast injury, nuclear plant and emergency response lectures, radiologic lectures, chemical biological lectures. These are ones that we do on special request where our toxicologists go out and perform these lectures to various groups. And they could be a combination of healthcare professionals or non-healthcare professionals. So these are very valuable classes, and many of these classes you sign up on our website to attend. Now, a little background on the who, what, and where, right? And as you can imagine, we have a distribution pattern of who calls us and who doesn't. And it's not that young children are calling us, we are called about young children. In fact, we were as high as 2/3 of our calls were in the age group of children less than 5 or 6 years of age. And that was a significant number. It's probably more closer to 50% now. Again, many of these younger parents are no longer calling us. They're looking on the web, but still, the bread and butter of what we do is handle calls about children. But there are other significant groups that we get called about, and so you could see there that the age distribution primarily favors children. Now, the kind of things they get into can be classified into one of two categories, right? Either drug categories or non-drug categories. So take a piece of paper out and think about this question. What do you think the top 4 drug categories that Poison Center gets called about? I'll give you a couple seconds to jot little notes down, but we'll go over the top 4, right? So let's see if my list compares to your list. So at number 4, did you have that or somewhere on your list, did you have that category of antihistamines, cough and cold preparations? Well, a very seasonal type exposure. Look, we're getting into the spring now. We're out and about. Pollen counts are up. People are going to be heavy into the use of cough and cold medicines, antihistamines, so very popular around this time of year. Also, when it comes to the flu season, lots of people are using the medicine, and the more we use stuff, the more stuff is left out, the more likely little Joey and Joanna are going to get into these meds. So that sits probably at number 4. Did you have this on your list? Antidepressants. Here's the problem with antidepressants, right? Very useful drugs, very important drugs in the healthcare marketplace. But when these products get ingested, it spells a lot of trouble, because already you're talking about folks who may be overdosing on this, who have a couple of strikes against them anyways, and then they take drugs that have what we call a very narrow therapeutic index, meaning the dose that makes the drug work is close to the dose where you get sick from the drug. So these are very dangerous drugs, and this particular group of drugs is going to come up a little bit later, but we get called a lot about antidepressants. Sort of in that same class, we get a lot of calls about drugs that make you go to sleep. They're known as sedatives or hypnotics. And then also sort of bunched in that group are drugs for psychosis. So the antipsychotics are very popular classes of drugs that we get called about. Now, I haven't mentioned the number 1 answer, but hopefully all of you have sort of mentioned it, whispered it, and put it down on your paper. But the number 1 class that we get called about, of course, pain medicines, the analgesics. So I'm talking about products like acetaminophen-containing products, aspirin-containing products, ibuprofen, and so on and so forth. So analgesics, very popular. And think about analgesics in kids. Just think about the brand Tylenol. Some of the more popular brands of Tylenol that we get called about are the flavored kind, the liquid types. the strawberries, the grape, the bubblegum flavor. Yeah, things that taste good. In fact, kids oftentimes, can't discern something that's medicine from something that's candy. Why do manufacturers do this? Well, you probably know the answer. If you said to yourself, compliance, that's the answer. The better something tastes, the more likely our children are going to take the medicine. Hey, when I was growing up, and if you're in my age group, we had some nasty tasting medicines. And for many of those, I didn't like taking them, and therefore I wasn't getting better quickly. In fact, I was an asthmatic when I was growing up, and we had the worst tasting medicines known to man, 30, 40 years ago. Now everything tastes like banana, strawberry, grape. It's incredible. But better compliance, in many cases, leads to more serious poisoning. All right, so we also have non-drug categories, and by far the ones that lead the pack are the personal hygiene items, cosmetics, and other products like that, and cleaning products. Now, why are those so popular? Well, think about it. Challenge yourself right now. Go to your kitchen and open the cabinet. Number one, it probably doesn't have a lock. And number two, you look in there, and for me, I see one thing. For you, you probably see another. You see dishwashing detergent, bleach, Windex, window cleaners. You see dishwashing detergent. What do I see? I see job security. That's what I see. Because number one, a lot of those products underneath our sinks are within easy reach of our children. You probably don't have locks that help minimize access to those areas. And look, those are the ones that we're going to get called about the most. One of the more tragic calls I got was when someone left Drano at the bottom of the kitchen cabinet, and the kid was easily able to get into the cabinet and drink the Drano. Very bad, very bad. Personal hygiene items, why are they so popular? Again, access. Think about, that kid who gets into the liquid foundation. Not really a sweet-tasting product, but it's not unusual for a kid to drink a couple mouthfuls of foundation, suck on eyeliner, suck on pens, chew lipstick, and imagine this. If I'm the mom and I'm putting on the lipstick, well, for those of you who are dads, some of you might be putting on lipstick too, right? So I'm not going to discriminate. But imagine this risk factor. You're putting on makeup, you're putting on lipstick, and the child is watching you do this. What do you think they're watching? They're not necessarily watching you put on and apply lipstick. You're probably looking to them like you're eating it. So it's not unusual for us to get calls about kids eating lipstick. Again, imitating adult behavior is one of the risk factors that we see with poisonings, and things like putting on makeup, taking medicine in front of them. These are the kind of things we don't want you to do, because our children, look, if they're mimicking some of the curse words that we're blurting out, you could easily see how they might imitate the behavior that we're exhibiting. So these are products that are within easy reach. And of course, the last one up there, plants, very popular too, because think about like the guy behind me, within easy reach, whether it's a child or even a pet. If there's access to something like that, believe you me, they get into it. And again, the two words that come to mind is job security. That's why I've got this great job, because hopefully you guys will keep on calling us because these things are out there. Now, let's talk about drugs that kill, chemicals and agents that kill. Think about that top four list that you want to draw out for me, and let's see if that top four list matches what's on mine. So at number 4 in terms of the leading killer, I mentioned this group a little bit earlier, and it's the antidepressants. Very effective drugs, narrow therapeutic index, but extremely dangerous. There are a couple antidepressants that are so dangerous that one pill can kill. No lie. So this is something that you have to be aware of. So whether it's you whether it's your parents, whether it's people's houses that you visit, you know, there's a simple rule that we have for any medicine, for any product, and that is to minimize poison, keep these products up and out of the reach. Okay, up and out of the reach. In fact, remember that case I told you about that involved Drano? That case came to me when I was in training and when I was a fellow, and that really rocked me and shaped me at a very young, at a very early point in my career. And that is, if a kid was able to get to the Drano, you know, in the kitchen right in front of the mother, you know, I wanted to make sure if I was ever blessed one day to have kids, and I do have kids now, they're grown, but if I was thinking back then in the late 80s, if I'm ever blessed to get married and have children, and I need to buy a product like Drano, I want to make sure that that is so far from anyone's reach that it would be literally impossible for them to get into. So if you go to my house, and I invite you to go to my house, my Drano is on my 3rd floor level. It's in the laundry room, in a cabinet that I even need a step stool to get at. I needed it to be inconvenient for me to get to so that it would be impossible for a kid to get into. But open up YouTube, and you'll find ingenious kids who will do just about anything, right? They will take chairs, position them in front of the countertop, climb onto the countertop, and climb onto the refrigerator. I've seen it. You've seen it, right? So if we keep things up and out of the reach, we don't prevent a poison from happening, but we minimize it. Okay, so number 3 on the list, did you have a category of heart medicines? Well, calcium channel blockers are a very nasty group of cardiac meds. And you may be familiar with products like amlodipine, nifedipine, verapamil, Kalen SR. If you or someone you know is taking a drug like this, here's the shocker. Again, one pill could kill. Years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago now, we had a 3-year-old come into the pediatric emergency room here at Grady. They took one Kalen, one calcium channel blocker, a sustained release product, and we lost that 3-year-old. It happens. It happens, and we don't want those cases to happen. But calcium channel blockers are bad news. Who's number 2? Did you talk about the analgesics? Acetaminophen in particular is a killer. Now, when you and I take normal doses of acetaminophen or Tylenol-containing products, shouldn't be a problem. But when people are overdosing on these drugs that you don't need a prescription for, and they're taking 30 at a time, 50 at a time, you know the organ system gets damaged, right? No, it's not the kidneys, it's the liver. If you take too much Tylenol and you don't get treated in time, your liver goes. And you know what the rule is. Once your liver goes, everything else goes, right? So acetaminophen kills. Who is number 1? Think about it. Not a medicine. Okay, that's one clue. We see deaths from this, from exposure to this poison year-round. Still no clue? Do you have on your list the compound that kills more people every year than any other poison? It's carbon monoxide. Yeah, whether it's poor exhaust out of heating systems, whether it's, and we've had this happen, someone barbecuing indoors, that's problematic. And I just learned today that if you are an owner of a particular type vehicle, make a vehicle, there have been reports of carbon monoxide leaking within the cabin of your vehicle. That's right. I just heard one of my colleagues here has a vehicle where they're investigating that very incidence of carbon monoxide leaking into your vehicle. Now here's the problem. Carbon monoxide is a silent killer. It produces early symptoms like flu-like, but here's the key. You feel like crap when you're in carbon monoxide in a place with carbon monoxide, you feel like you're sick. You feel like you're lethargic. But guess what? You're not suffering flu because when you move away from that area, you start feeling better. And usually with flu-like symptoms, you feel like crap at home, and then you feel like crap at work. Okay, that ain't carbon monoxide. But if all of a sudden you're miraculously better when you get home, you may want to double think. You may be exposed to carbon monoxide. House fires are a very common source of carbon monoxide. So the number one killer every year. Now, I'm going to quickly go over a few cases here that are kind of eye-openers, and I wanted to share with you sort of real-life stories that we've gotten here with agents that you might have familiarity with, but didn't necessarily know could cause a problem. Now, let's look at the first problem that we teach quite often here in our training sessions, and that is exposure to what is known as methyl salicylate. Now, a product that contains methyl salicylate is a product called oil of wintergreen. Commonly used, to treat arthritis. It is one of those topical agents that smells sort of spearmint-y and could be quite attractive to an unsuspecting child. But it's the same active ingredient that we also see in Bengay, in muscle pain relief medicines. Check the label. Methyl salicylate, nasty. But in some of those other products, a very much smaller percent of active drug. But in oil of wintergreen, 98%. Let me tell you how toxic that is. If a kid only gets one or two small mouthfuls, this is enough to kill him or her. Did you know that? One or two mouthfuls. Now, what's the problem here? The problem is methyl salicylate is 1.5 times more toxic than aspirin. In fact, it's an aspirin-like drug. And if you do the fancy math, and I'm not asking you to do the math, but I'm going to represent this graphically for you. If a child who is your average 2 or 3-year-old who weighs maybe 30 pounds ingest a couple of mouthfuls, 2 little small swigs of oil of wintergreen, this is the equivalent of ingesting over 20 regular aspirin pills. Now, that should shock you. In fact, the normal dose of aspirin is 10 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. By taking 1 or 2 mouthfuls of methyl salicylate in oil of wintergreen, you've ingested the equivalent of over 20 aspirin pills, and you're now at 500 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. That is life-threatening. Now, the problem with aspirin, it's one of those poisons that, makes you sick, makes you more sick, and you're still not dead. Look, I'm not going to be trying to kill myself with aspirin. I'd rather shoot myself than be sick all day long. But look at this. It's the equivalent of 20 tablets, and I will tell you that we get many a call here of patients taking 20 and 50 tablets. Look, if they were really smart and they wanted to kill themselves with aspirin, just take a couple mouthfuls of methyl salicylate, of oil of wintergreen. Me, I can't even take 20 M&Ms at one time. I mean, let alone 20 pills of aspirin. This is extremely dangerous. And when you look at the different formulations, I mentioned sports creams, but did you know that aspirin also is in a product like Pepto-Bismol? That's right. So if you're experiencing lots of number 2 and you're taking Pepto-Bismol, not only might you have the stomach issues, but you also may have aspirin poisoning if you go ahead and down that whole bottle. So there's aspirin in Pepto-Bismol, as I mentioned, oil of wintergreen. And so there are a number of both over-the-counter and prescription meds that have this. And as I mentioned with the sports creams, Bengay is one of the most popular forms that has methyl salicylate, albeit 15 to 20%. Things like Icy Hot, those kind of products all have aspirin in it. Now, this slide is more important for someone like me who treats this, but there is every system on earth affected by aspirin, all right? And the problem with treating is there's really no antidote. The more common antidote that we use is WYSIWYG. You guys, out of curiosity, you guys familiar with WYSIWYG? Oh, some of you don't even know what that antidote is? You should be ashamed of yourself. Many of you are nurses, right? WYSIWYG is the most commonly used antidote in all of toxicology. And if you're unaware of what it is, I'll tell you. WYSIWYG basically stands for what you see is what you get. That's the way aspirin is treated. No magic antidote, nothing that can reverse the signs and symptoms better than supportive care is basically what it is. We give them fluids, we give them things to regulate their blood pH, and if they get a lot, like say that kid who might have gotten 1 or 2 mouthfuls, then we do superhuman things like dialyze them. But the problem with aspirin, as I mentioned, you get sick, you get more sick, and you're still not dead. So why do people even do aspirin? You know, like I said, that's probably going to be gun to my head if I ever get to that point. Another tragic kind of case that we get here. Think about this, and even in just the first sentence, you're probably already anxious. 10 o'clock at night, a 12-year-old is calling the poison center. Anything wrong with that picture? Right off the bat? A lot of things. But they're calling about, she has the sense enough to call about a sick 4-year-old sibling who was noted to be sick, vomiting pill fragments earlier, but right now is fine. Now, it's 10 p.m. What's the obvious? Where are the parents? All right? Well, it gets even more tragic. Well, we had referred that kid in, but right around that time, the mother comes home, and the mother is a nurse. And look, we're the worst nurses, pharmacists. You know, when it comes to deciding whether or not someone should go in or not, say a family member, we're always self-treating and self-diagnosing. We're the worst, you know, let's be honest, to decide whether or not we should go in. Most of us just stay home. But here's the mom who's a nurse at a local hospital, and she comes in and she notices that the child's okay and appeared asymptomatic. So she decides to go ahead and keep the kid at home.
Perfect.
Now, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the kid is being awoken for daycare. The kid is unresponsive, pale. EMS ends up getting on the scene and transporting the kid, unfortunately, dead on arrival. So anybody have an idea of what this could be? And before we get to the next slide, there are a couple of you who have not placed your phone and your computer on mute. I could hear some in the background, some noise in the background. So if you're able to put yourself on mute, I'm sure that would be greatly appreciated. Now, tragically, EMS, as I said, gets to the site, and we've got a dead kid at home. And here's the problem. The kid got into an iron-containing product. And there are many iron-containing products out there in the market, most notably iron supplements and prenatal vitamins. But we do have other products like Fred and Wilma and Batman and Smurfs and Power Rangers. Many of those vitamins are out there on the market. Many of them contain iron. That's when we run into problems. Now, the issue with iron is that, like aspirin, everybody and their mother is affected. Every system, from the stomach to the nervous system to even the liver. In fact, if you don't die early from the shock, then you could possibly die late from liver failure.
Okay.
Aspirin's nasty.
Right.
Iron makes you really sick. And at one point, Georgia had the distinction of having the most iron deaths in all of the nation. That was tragic. In fact, the year that we had the most is when we had 3 cases, 3 pediatric cases of iron deaths. One particular iron death that I knew of that I was involved with, where I was a consult on the case, was a kid who had an incredibly high iron level. Think about this. If you or I were to measure our iron level in our system, just remember the number 100. We'd have a level of about 100 micrograms per DL. So the units don't really matter. But imagine this kid who died many years ago who got into iron. He had a level of greater than 15,000. Remember, I just told you that an iron level of 100 is normal. This kid tragically had a level greater than 15,000. Not good. The kid died fairly quickly, and then when the doctors asked me, what do you think he got into, how much of it did they get into? The product was prenatal vitamins, and those of us who are moms who've taken prenatal vitamins, the pills are like, what, this size? They smell awful, taste awful. When I did some backwards calculations, I figured that the kid might have gotten somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 to 70 prenatal vitamins. How does that happen? I could talk about iron for a whole hour. I don't have the time now, but that kid tragically died. It happens. Things that smell bad, taste bad. Look, when kids are hungry, they'll go after anything. Now, there's a lot of misconceptions about iron. Look, you think it's safe, it's over the counter, but there's not great labeling. There's not good use of safety caps. There is an antidote, but despite even getting antidotes in these 3 overdose deaths that we had, all the kids died. So, use of antidotes and living is really a Hollywood kind of phenomenon. Because only in the movies do you get sick, there's an antidote for the sickness, and you're better. Well, those of us, all of us who are in healthcare know, just because you get treated with the antidote doesn't necessarily mean you survive. So, there is an antidote, just to let you know, but it doesn't always work. Now, you'll love the last case. Physician calling us at 4 in the afternoon, this kid with altered mental status, and what is noted to be bloody vomiting, is unresponsive but has an airway. And again, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the patient is critical enough to be transported to one of the local children's hospitals. So if you're thinking about a kid who's sedated, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a 5, 6-year-old, you might think, okay, how do you get blood in your, or supposedly blood in your vomitus, and you're altered? We do routine drug screens, and there's nothing in there. The patient's in the ED still having vomiting. We give them IV fluids. And we do one other lab test. Anyone figure out yet what we might be dealing with a very drowsy kid? Well, what about this number? A blood alcohol of 0.211. In Georgia, to be considered legally drunk is 0.08 or 80 milligram per deciliter. A kid with nearly 3 times that. How does a 5, 6-year-old have a blood alcohol of over 200? That's a great question. So let's think about some of the sources of alcohol. Well, they're the classics, right? Beer, wine, and again, 4 o'clock was an important clue because that kid wasn't home. You think he had access wherever that child was? Hopefully in school, right? To beer, wine, hard liquor? Not likely. What about to mouthwash? What about to cough and cold preps? Not likely. Maybe the kid got into cleaning supplies at the school? Not likely, but you'd be surprised how many cleaning products have alcohol in it. What did the kid get into? Voila. Hand sanitizers. Yeah, if you made mention on your little mental note sheet that hand sanitizer was a likely source, a lot of us didn't know this answer. Think about beer and wines when you talk about alcohol content, right? 5%, 12%. Look, hard liquor, vodka, whiskeys, they have 40%. But what about hand sanitizers? They can have up to 95% alcohol. More than twice that we have in a shot of rum or a whiskey. Yeah, didn't know that, right? And even worse yet, this is something that we as parents probably do. Now, I will tell you, if you put a bottle of rum in your kid's backpack and they take it to school, you're going to jail, right? Okay, But a bottle of rum is way more safer, technically speaking, than, say, hand sanitizer. Because, look, on a school supply list, they're telling you as a parent, buy this hand sanitizer and send it along with your kid. Well, you should be noticed as a child abuser as well if you're putting hand sanitizer in your kid's backpack, because this is twice as strong as rum. Who knew? We see this all the time. Kids getting a swig or two, people abusing this stuff just for the alcohol effect. But if you didn't know, now you know. Hand sanitizer can be extremely dangerous. And when you're talking about a kid who is acting drunk, and look, we've had kids drink this at school, and you know that hematemesis that we talked about at the very beginning? They thought they saw blood-colored, blood-tinged vomitus. You know what that was due to? The kid got into strawberry-scented hand wash. And if you go back a couple of slides, look at the different colors. Look at the different scents. This is why these things are popular. Again, if it tastes good, smells good, a kid's probably going to do it. And they thought it was blood when, in fact, it was actually the strawberry flavors. Now, drugs and chemicals we've sort of gone over, but there are other things that we've got that we get called about here. You may not know this, but we are the second busiest state east of the Mississippi when it comes to snake bites. How many do we handle every year? About 500 snake bites a year. And look, it just started getting warm. Snakes are going to be out and about. We've already started getting calls about snake bites here. Yeah, it's a problem. Anybody know what the antidote for snake bites are? I don't have them on me. Oh, you knew the answer of car keys? Yeah, that's right. Car keys. Why? Get to a hospital as soon as possible, regardless of whether you think you know if the snake is venomous or not. There are a lot of us so-called snake experts out there, but really, you don't know. And if you watch John Wayne movies like Cutting and Sucking, that's not the way to go either. Get to a hospital. They'll call the poison center. We'll decide whether or not someone needs treatment. But we get animal bites I mentioned earlier. We get insects, bees, wasps, caterpillars, spiders, black widows, brown recluse. We get lots of calls about them. We also get lots of calls about chemical agents like anthrax. We've been involved in peanut butter recalls. We do a lot of other preparedness things for the state. In fact, Jess went through a major preparedness exercise and preparation for Super Bowl when it was in our backyard. But look at all the different things that we've done over the years, especially really busy back in the summer of '92 when we got word that we would get the Olympics. Remember that? And then in 1996, we actually had the Olympics here. So all that stuff in the background we had to prepare for. So not just, for iron and methyl salicylate and hand sanitizer, we had to prepare a lot of things for our games when they were held here. We've also been on the forefront of major trends. You probably heard of people getting into caffeine that you could just buy at Amazon. What about the bath salts? And you probably remember that guy in South Florida who ate the other guy's face off. That was either bath salts or a variation of bath salts. Something that's still around is that fake marijuana, the synthetic cannabinoids. We were at the forefront of starting to report those cases back in 2010. Just a couple years ago, we alerted the public about this outbreak of fake Percocets in Middle Georgia. And when one or two Percocets were putting people into the hospital almost dying, you knew they weren't taking Percocets. And of course, what's the backdrop? The opioid crisis. And what did this stuff have in there? It wasn't the stuff that you normally see in Percocet. It was heroin and fentanyl. No wonder these people were getting sick and almost dying. We had nearly 50 cases reported to us over a couple 2 to 3 week period. Very nasty stuff, but we were at the forefront of that. And what's the deal with fentanyl? Nasty, very strong, 1,000 times stronger than morphine, has really limited medical value, but with the opioid crisis, we're seeing more and more agents and patients that have been dying from not just heroin, but from fentanyl-contaminated products. In fact, when we isolated that compound that we found in the Percocet, it was cyclopropylfentanyl, first identified here, but in 2017, across the nation, there ended up being over 100 deaths related to cyclopropylfentanyl. Now, when they were not getting into fentanyl, unfortunately for us in Georgia, we didn't see this, but this other fake designer drug that was heroin-like was Crocodile. And if you have a weak stomach, don't look and just turn away with the next slides. But this particular nasty product was out there for people who were looking for a similar high, but at a much reduced cost. To look up more of what was in this stuff, Google it, but it really was a product of codeine, paint thinner, hydrochloric acid, and scraped red phosphorus from matchboxes. Yeah, that's what you end up. Makeup's not going to help that person, all right? Okay, other things that have made the news, laundry pods, very popular. Just last Valentine's Day, remember this in the news? Local middle school, someone brought in THC edibles. Idiots. Look, these kind of products, can be very dangerous, and then the right kid with the right kind of medical issues may be, even deadly. And then lastly, as I'm looking to close out this, because I know I'm running out of time, yes, we get a call. We get a lot of calls about life and death, but in between life and death are interesting cases, and so I'm just going to share a couple of them with you. Are you kidding me? How does a toothache equal death? Quickly, we had a patient who was at one of the local colleges. They had one of those super long weekends, like you had Friday off and Monday off, and there's probably no worse pain than tooth pain, right? But what this person was doing, they didn't bother going into the dentist. They self-medicated with Tylenol. They were taking extra-strength Tylenol all weekend long, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 12 tablets a day for 4 or 5 days. By the time they got seen on Tuesday, they looked awful, and they subsequently died. But that's how you can die from a toothache. We had someone who thought, and you probably guessed, they lived in South Georgia, but they thought they killed a rattlesnake by running it over once, and then they were smart enough to say, it's probably not dead, so I'm going to run over it again. So they go backwards and run over it, and just for good measure, they go forward again to run over it to kill it, really kill it. And then the South Georgia guy decides, I want a memento, so he put it in the back of his vehicle, and in the process, the snake got pissed off and bit him. That guy ended up going to a local ER, requiring 60 vials of antivenom. Generally, all you need is 5 to 8 or 5 to 10. He needed 60. Fortunately, that guy lived. He will still be able to procreate, so who knows, we might see more of those kind of situations in the future. And then what can cause a coma where you just get 1 or 2 cc's? Do you know Visine? Is that poisonous? Is that toxic? You need to make sure that products like Visine are up and out of the reach. And then lastly, have you heard the story of widow's revenge? And I'm not talking about, a grieving spouse who lost a spouse. I'm talking about the black widow's revenge. Now imagine this. You're a construction worker and you need to relieve yourself. So you go and relieve yourself in the corner, and then you see a black widow, and you think you're pretty smart, and you think you're pretty funny, so you try to shoot it down, right? Well then, what if that black widow gets angry and decides, I don't like all this warm food on me, and decides to jump right there? Well, You're right. That's how that guy got into the emergency room, because the black widow jumped right there. In fact, the doctor said to me, Dr. Lopez, I want to talk to you about a case where a patient was envenomated with the black widow, and he was bitten right there. I was going, right there? I didn't kind of get where right there is. And then all of a sudden, the male hormones kicked in. I said, oh, you mean like right there? and I could hear the guy in the background screaming and yelling in pain. And yeah, fortunately, we didn't have to cut it off, but we did treat him with other medication, and he did fine. But yeah, that's a pretty good story. And then lastly, what about this life and death story? Mom, 3 days earlier, gives the poison center a call because the kid gets into a used condom. Kind of gross, right? So we tell the mom, wash the kid off, the kid should be fine. And then we happen to do a home follow-up a couple days later. So we call on little Johnny, and the dad answers the phone. Mom's not home. So the dad answers the phone. Hey, this is the poison center. We want to see how little Johnny was doing. The dad, sort of unaware. What do you mean, the poison center? Yeah, your wife called us on Saturday, and I know some of you are laughing already. Yeah, your wife called on Saturday and said your kid got into a used condom. And the father says, you're saying my wife, Jane, called on Saturday? He says, yeah, about your little son. And then the father says to the poison specialist, that's funny. I wasn't home this weekend. And all we did was say, well, if you ever need us in the future, give us a call back, and we hung up right away. So that probably was a life and death kind of call now that I think about it. But it did sort of make our magic book, our blue book of calls that we get here, and it's one of the more notorious calls here. So in the event that you ever need to reach us, there are ways to reach us, traditional ways of calling us on the 800 number, on our local number, and in fact our 800 number is really easy to remember. 800, which you don't even have to memorize, but think about a 1 sandwiched between 3 2s. And if you dial this number anywhere in the United States, you'll get a poison center. So it's 800-222-1222. Now, if you mix up and put the numbers in the wrong order, like 221-1212, we've had people do that thinking they're calling Delta, wanting a flight reservation. No, you've reached the poison center. So 222-1222 is how to reach us. We're also available on our website for live chats and emails. And, of course, be friends with us. Follow us on Twitter, where you'll get more information about the kind of things that we do.